how did it play out that we were locking down businesses, and I know that was a state issue, but allowing these sorts of things to happen in Australia in 2020? Were you troubled by the COVID period in that manner?
When I was the health minister in the Howard government, I did a lot of thinking about potential pandemics. Back in the day, we were worried about a bird flu pandemic because we did have several hundreds of cases of bird flu in China and other parts of East Asia. And that was a very, very deadly disease, something like a 30% case fatality rate. And we feared that any pandemic version, at least initially, would have a very, very high mortality rate, perhaps exceeding the mortality rate of the Spanish flu pandemic back in the 1918, 1919. And in the United States, which then had a population of about 100 million, it's thought that 500,000 people perished as a result of that pandemic. So we all did a lot of thinking back then, and the result of that thinking was a national pandemic plan here in Australia, and there were similar pandemic plans in all of the other major countries. Those plans essentially provided for a strict quarantine on the borders for a period of time during which we would ramp up our hospital system to cope and do our best to protect the elderly. But there was never any thought of ordering people to stay at home, ordering business to close. In fact, we thought that the big challenge would be keeping essential services going, given levels of disease and given the fear that people might have of going abroad under such circumstances. Interestingly, all of the pandemic plans, including our own, were essentially junked in the first weeks of March 2020 in favour of the Wuhan Plan. And the Wuhan Plan was basically lock everyone up and hope that this virus disappears. Well, once you've got a virus, it's not going to disappear. We've got to learn to live with it, as the pandemic plans accepted. But no, in our better understanding, supposedly better understanding, we went with the Wuhan Plan and thought that we could eliminate the virus. Well, we spent the best part of 2 years trying to do that. We inflicted massive damage on ourselves. Yes, we probably did minimise deaths early on by doing this, but in the end, we were always going to have to cope with this. And I certainly think that the first lockdown may have been justifiable, but the subsequent lockdowns certainly weren't.